Life has been keeping me busy, so I was unable to do any reviews until now, but I'm back again, today with some God of War. God of War has always been one of the big PlayStation exclusive titles. They exist on all Sony gaming devices in order to sell the consoles themselves, and this case is not much different. They put a lot of love into God of War as they wanted to make sure that it's a title that would be well received and people would desire. The reboot has received praise everywhere, currently sitting at a Metascore of 95 and a user score of 9.3. This naturally has got my attention, and so I decided to buy a digital version and play it. I managed to complete God of War within 20 hours, making it most definitely worth the money from a length-based perspective. But how does that gameplay fare? How are the story, the pacing, and the characters? The story takes place in Midgard, or as we like to call it, Earth. Specifically an area populated by creatures and legends from Norse mythology. We take on the role of the God of War himself, Kratos, together with his son Atreus. They go on a journey to spread the ashes of their wife and mother on the highest peak of all realms. During the journey, they have to face several different challenges, which includes fighting Norse gods and other mythological creatures that come in their way. They of course also build an inevitable father-to-son bond, which is predictable but very well executed. The story and the characters of God of War have never been better. Every cinematic section in the game was exciting to both watch and listen to, and the game does an outstanding job of showing instead of telling. You could have all the cutscenes muted and you would still be able to understand what's currently happening on screen. Another feature that's worth praising is the game's focus on flawless transitions. The only time God of War has a loading screen is when you load a save file or when you return to the menu. Additionally, there is no off-screen teleportation of the characters. Something like fade to black and that the characters are back at the place they're supposed to be doesn't exist here. Everything that happens in-game happens on screen. Gameplay-wise, the game isn't as hacky and slashy as the old ones. Instead of having a lot of enemies on screen being swiped away by Kratos' blades of chaos, there's now a smaller amount of enemies on screen which take more time to fight. It's definitely very opinion-based whether this change in direction is a benefit or a hindrance. The options during combat are light axe throw, heavy axe throw, light attack, heavy attack, block, sidestep, and dodge roll. Also a parry mechanic if you block at the right time. First things I've heard from reviewers talking about the God of War combat is the comparison to Dark Souls. I don't want to turn this review into a rant about reviewers comparing too many things to Dark Souls, even if it seems like it will be fun. No, this is a review about the game, and I can definitely tell you that dodge rolls, blocking, and combat being a bit slower than old God of War does not instantly mean it's Dark Soulsy. Dark Souls didn't invent dodge rolls. Alright, I digress. The combat is easy to get into. Parry frames and invincibility frames during dodge rolls are very generous and allow for newcomers to easily get a grip on the gameplay. There's a decent amount of strategies you can use during combat, including the ability to cheese 80% of it by throwing your weapon instead of going into melee fights. God of War is by all means a solid game. I enjoyed the 20 to 25 hours I spent in it and don't regret my purchase, but a 10 out of 10? Nah, I would not say so. I've been praising the game quite a lot, but I think it's high time for me to get into the cons, as the game does have those. Let's start with the objective things. The game runs at 30 frames per second. I know it's a milked complaint, but I strongly believe it's valid to mention that 30 frames per second is really something that video games have to move away from. In fast-paced action games, 30 frames per second instead of 60 means you have only half the frames to react to enemy attacks. Add interface, motion blur, lens flares, and other obnoxious effects and you end up getting hit by things that you didn't even have time to realize that were there. I do have to give credit where credit is due. Motion blur can be turned off and the user interface is fairly minimal. In fact, it's even a bit too minimal. Very often it's difficult to tell whether Kratos can take another hit or not, or whether the runic abilities are off cooldown or still on cooldown. For the runic abilities you have a bar slowly filling up. However, when it's almost full it's nearly impossible to tell whether it can be used or not. That is until you actually attempt to use it, in which case you often end up in awkward scenarios where your ability doesn't come out and you get slapped. The camera is very zoomed in. Kratos himself nearly covers 1/3 of the screen, making it hard to keep track of enemies. The developers clearly knew of this issue and added a traffic cone system below Kratos, warning you of incoming attacks. An arrow appears on the screen when the enemy is preparing an attack. When the enemy is attacking, then the arrow turns red. The issue with the compass is that it's inconsistent and unreliable. It doesn't count in distance, meaning that it will warn you of incoming attacks when enemies are out of range. It'll warn you of projectiles even when the projectiles already flew past you. Having to combine my own sight and rely on that compass made a lot of combat scenarios a massive mess. Increasing the difficulty beyond normal will turn all enemies into massive sponges. They can soak up 30 hits or so until they finally go down. And giving enemies increased health pools is not good game design, as it turns exciting combat scenarios into a patience workout, testing how much it'll take until that blood vessel in your head explodes. God of War is full of unskippable cutscenes, and as I like to call them, the walkie-talkie sections. You're stuck waiting and walking around until a character stops talking. This robs the game of any kind of replayability. In addition to all that, the game is just a teaser towards a sequel. If you were hoping to destroy all the major Norse gods and creatures in this game, then I'm afraid you're going to be as disappointed as I am. Can't wait to see the confusion God of War 2 is going to cause. I mean, the sequel to this game, not the already existing one. To keep things interesting, there is an experience system to purchase skills and a crafting system to upgrade armor and weapons. The experience system makes sense and is absolutely fine. Purchasing abilities with experience is a very basic progression system that should be there at a minimum. The crafting system, however, is a bit of a spit in the face. It's incredibly shallow and really has nothing lost in this game. Kratos was more than capable of handling entire Greece without a shirt. Why on earth does he suddenly need armor? Oh, I know why. To give you an excuse to do side quests. Unlike previous God of Wars, this God of War is somewhat open world. You have a central area that is connected to several different other areas. You're able to go to them to complete side quests. The side quests exist for the people who wish to get the best gear in the game or challenge themselves. I was hoping for the possibility to meet some mythological side characters in them, but alas, that was not the case. In fact, at one point it even brought my hopes up to meet a certain dwarf, just to have those hopes crushed, destroyed, and completely set on fire. Still, it is just optional side content, and they are for the people who enjoy God of War and want more of it. So God of War doesn't really lose points for me for this, as the campaign offers a sufficient amount of playtime. There's a good amount more I could say regarding God of War, both in positive sense and negative sense, but I believe that it would stretch the video into an unnecessary podcast and would like to get to the point quickly. Would I recommend God of War? To some. If you're a big fan of the narrative in games such as Uncharted and The Last of Us, then you will definitely enjoy it in God of War. If you want hack and slash and are looking for something that is easy to get into, then you will enjoy the new God of War. But if you are tired of the AAA trend that is occurring with PlayStation exclusive titles such as the ones previously mentioned, then you should avoid this game. If you were to ask me where my opinion stands on this title, then I'm afraid I couldn't give you a straight answer. It's a mixed bag for me. I liked some of it and disliked some of it. I can agree with both parties. The ones enjoying the game and the ones that say it's overrated. I would definitely neither call it a 10 out of 10 or below average. In the end, I would say I quite enjoyed the journey, and I believe most of you will too.